I think landlords should absolutely increase rents.
What's your kind of general take on how the bill and the future looks then for a tenant in terms of their rights?
If a tenant feels like the landlord is being ridiculously greedy with their proposed rent increases, 400,000 properties a year need to be built or something like that. A landlord has no obligation to improve the property whilst you're living there. There are tenants probably that are having to be served notice while they can on a Section 21 notice.
Oh yeah, of course. What about evictions? That's definitely something where tenants are in a better position.
Most landlords will make it their absolute priority, whether it's 2 in the morning or 4 in the afternoon, to get a plumber out to try and repair it or replace it as soon as possible.
I think people's assumption is landlords just kind of sit back. They've got all this money, they've got all these houses. Welcome to your next chapter, presented by Power Bespoke. I'm absolutely delighted to be chatting with Perry again about the Renters' Rights Bill. The reason I say that, Perry, is I found the last episode where we talked about this very interesting, because we made a lot of predictions about how this could unfold. You flagged lots of concerns for landlords and just for the property market in general, which we're going to pick up on today's episode. We're going to get an update from you on how that's gone. Have there been any changes, any developments? What have people been saying? And then we're going to focus on an area that we didn't touch on loads in the last episode, and that's tenants' rights under this new bill.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And the last video done incredibly well, got lots of comments, and I'm going to go through a few comments that I wanted to answer live on our next video, as in this one, because we've been getting a lot of comments and I'm trying to reply to them the best I can, but they might take me a while to reply. But I thought it'd be good to pick out some and answer them on this video.
Yeah, great.
So take this like a Renters' Rights Bill update, maybe.
Ace. On that note then, what has changed since the bill was announced? What developments have taken place?
It's going pretty quick. It's expected to become law by the end of this year. It was expected spring, summer this year. That's been pushed out. It's gone through the House of Commons. It's in the House of Lords. They're debating some changes. We'll touch on those little potential changes in a minute. Then it'll go to Royal Assent, and then it'll probably be law come October, November, December. Last quarter this year, I reckon.
Okay. So there is still time for back and forth and changes. It's not completely signed off yet. They're obviously debating it and discussing it. And I imagine they're debating some of the things that you mentioned on the last show, because it wasn't quite as clean cut as maybe some policymakers wanted it to be when they wrote the bill.
I do feel like they've maybe started to backtrack a little bit on the amount of unfairness there was going to be towards landlords with the bill. For example, what's being talked about is the bill proposed that a landlord, we know that the Section 21 notice, no fault eviction is going to be abolished. And that's fine. It is what it is. I do still think that the government, because of the lack of housing, social housing, are trying to impose more sanctions, legislation, red tape on landlords to make it private landlords' problem for the lack of social housing we have. But that's fine as well. If being a private landlord now means that you've got to have a bit more control by the government, and so be it. But what they were proposing was that a landlord couldn't serve a Section 8 notice, which is a breach of tenancy, rent arrears specifically, until the tenant was 3 months in arrears. There was uproar about that, because currently it's 2 months.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of money.
It's a bit unfair, for landlords. Bearing in mind 80% of landlords are 1 or 2 property landlords. It's not their full-time gig. They need the money to pay their mortgage. So they've backtracked on that, or they're talking about backtracking to keep it the same as 2 months, which is fair. We're going to take your ability to remove a tenant from your property just because you want to. We're going to remove the ability to take them to court for rent arrears until they're 3 months in arrears. And it all become a little bit like, it's almost like anti-landlord. Balancing a bit more out now, that I think 2 months is reasonable. It's always been that way. I still think it's a bit too late, because a lot of landlords would be probably behind in their mortgage by that point. And that's then their mortgage lender is starting to take action while they go through the courts. The court's got a huge long process. And let's not forget that it's not, and this is another part of the bill, it's not just you can't get them out until they're 2 months in arrears. Like you can start the eviction process.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. It's like, it wouldn't be like the end of the 2 months and then that's it, it's sorted out. It's more like the end of the 2 months, right now I can do something.
Then you've probably got another 4 to 6 months of court backlog and process.
All the while the tenant's in the property and you're not getting any money.
Yeah.
Oh man, how does it even work for a landlord?
And I think again most tenants would feel the pain. I think you were a tenant once upon a time, right?
Oh yeah, huge part.
And you would understand that if I was 4 months late on my rent for my property, that's going to probably affect my landlord negatively.
Yeah.
Unless it's some corporation landlord, but even then, your rent pays for the maintenance of the property, yes, and profit if they're a business, but it's not buy-to-lets isn't as lucrative as it used to be, for sure.
There was like a big boom of it, right?
Yeah.
It was kind of like...
Fees are hard, taxation's changed, yada, 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 and it isn't as lucrative as it used to be. There's still most likely long-term capital growth. That's lucrative over a long-term period. Yeah. But month to month, day to day, it's not hugely lucrative. So that's one good thing that's going to change, or they're talking about changing. The other thing is removing. So what they were talking about is that a tenant couldn't pay rent up front, like 6 months up front, and they're looking to rewind that. I was just getting the latest updates, and I've got it on my iPad here. It's going to be in the House of Lords on the 22nd of April. What are we now? 10th, yeah. So it's going to start going. Then it started getting debated by the House of Lords, and the proposed changes. The key amendments are bringing the 3-month rent arrears grounds for eviction to keeping it at 2 months. But they're proposing a caveat to exempt arrears caused by issues with universal credit payments. Now I find that incredible.
That's interesting.
As in, if it's our cock up at the government, we're going to give you can't do it. You can't evict for longer. So interestingly, there the update states that they also propose a caveat to exempt arrears caused by issues with universal credit payments, which comes from the government. Or
so if the government are messing up and you're a landlord, then it's kind of like, well, lucky we messed up, but
yeah, give us more time to correct it at some point, and then you'll be flush again.
I guess for the landlord, there's some reassurance that they will sort that out. The government aren't going to be like, well, you'd hope.
No, I don't think they're going to bump you.
It will get fee.
The other good thing, which I think is really good, is that they're proposing the National Residential Landlords Association, the NRLA. If you're a private landlord that doesn't have your properties managed, you should absolutely get in touch with them. They're a really good, massive national body, and they've got a big voice in government actually as well. They're suggesting introducing a system potentially involving the Valuation Office Agency, so the company that do the council tax valuation, to assess rent increases before disputes are taken to a tribunal. So what the previous Renters' Rights Bill proposed was that if a tenant feels like the landlord is being ridiculously greedy with their proposed rent increases, which they will only be able to do once a year, then the tenant can take it to a tribunal. But I think they're probably realising that the courts can't even keep up with the current.
Yeah, like that's.
So they're suggesting making it the Valuation Office Agency's problem initially, and saying, can you assess this property? Is that the right kind of rent? Are they being unfair? Yes or no? Stamp, and then it pass through.
Okay.
That feels to me like a bit of making it a bit better.
Yeah. Seems more sensible than just a huge queue of something never getting sorted.
And then there was obviously mitigating, one of the other things, key amendments in discussion, are mitigating arrears risk. So proposals include following an initial rent payment as a condition of agreeing a tenancy. So previously, as part of the bill, you weren't allowed to kind of favour tenants that were going to be able to offer 6 months rent up front. But I think that they're going back on that. If a tenant is able to offer 6 months up front, that's a tenant's prerogative, and you should be allowed to say yes, because that's mitigating the risk of rent arrears, because you've got all the rent up front. We're going to be talking about advice for tenants in a minute, but this is a really, really important one, and we get it a lot. If you can offer a landlord to pay their rent up front, we had it today actually in our agency, it's a great sweetener, I guess, but there's a massive, massive caveat to it. You have to, my advice to all tenants is, you have to say to the agency, I'll pay you the 6 months up front, but I want you to pay my landlord monthly.
Okay.
Really, really important, because not all landlords are good landlords, and we agreed this on the last podcast, right? Most of them are good, but you won't know until you've moved into a property, and with rents as high as they are, 6 months rent, you're talking 6 to 8 grand minimum. That gets transferred to the landlord, your boiler breaks the next week, and they're like, oh, yeah. So it's great that you can offer up front, and if you can, high five, and you will probably get a yes from the landlord, because all a landlord wants is absolute guarantee they're going to get their rent. Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in their bank account right at the start of the tenancy. You can say, I'll offer you 6 months up front, but I want it held by the agency, and I want it paid to the landlord each month. And the agency will always do that, I guess, because it's in their interest as well, right? They're like, yeah. They won't charge for anything like that. It's just like... And but then a landlord might say, no, I want it all up front. And we just send it in, and we would have to say to the tenant that can you put in writing that you're happy for us, if the tenant's happy for that. Generally it's when we're managing the property as well. Yeah. Because that's fine, because we're in control. When we manage a tenancy, we're allowed to be what's called the agent of necessity. So we can overrule our landlord's decision. Oh, really? So you could be like, actually, yeah, they are getting that boiler because
than
Yeah,
we're doing
exactly.
it now.
Yeah, you can't do that.
And you could spend the landlord's money
because
you've got the account.
Yeah, because we've got it in advance, but we'll be getting it next month anyway.
Yeah,
because we collect the rent and manage the property, and we've had to actually do that in a couple of occasions. Not because the landlords were horrible, because they went AWOL, and it was because there was a big situation, and they had a death in the family, they were uncontactable, and we had to just go ahead and get something fixed. So that's really important advice for tenants. If you're paying up front, ideally have the agent hold the rent and pay the landlord monthly. The other one is the bill. It says here the implementation plan. The National Residential Landlord Association emphasises the need for a comprehensive implementation plan for the bill's changes, including clear plans for the justice system. That's where I don't think it's been kind of thought through, is they were talking about a separate court and all this kind of thing, but they're looking to roll this out as quickly as possible, and there's not even the special evictions court set up. So it's going to cause a huge backlog. But on the whole, I mean, it says here the expected timelines are it will be with royal assent by the summer. So the next couple of months, it's going to be with the House of Lords. And then the anticipated implementation time for the new regulations are October 2025.
Okay.
Well, I think that'd be November, December time.
Do you feel a bit more optimistic about it? Not that you were particularly pessimistic last time we talked about it, but you were definitely highlighting some concerns and issues that were no doubt going to rear their head.
I think the amount of uproar it's caused, and these big national residential land associations have started to get very vocal. And I think the government are starting to think, actually, hang on, we've got landlords leaving the market in their droves. We're taxing them to high heaven. We're going to probably regret this in a couple of years' time. But the results of it are still happening. Rents are rising, and there's not a great deal.
Have you seen that since like, is that a month-by-month thing? Rents are cranking?
Yeah. I think we're going to see again this year 10%, 12% rent increase.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you think how much of that is because of this? Or is that just, I mean, everything's getting more expensive, isn't it? It's not like we're in an economy where we go, I can't believe everything's stable and getting cheap. Like, most things are getting more expensive.
Yeah, but I think it's exaggerated by this.
Because landlords are stressed out, like, get it up now.
Yeah.
Like, just get the price. Wherever,
Yeah. And there are tenants probably that are having to be served notice while they can on a Section 21 notice.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Because in a minute they might be able to. That's causing more tenants needing to find somewhere. Or new properties, but as we discussed last time, I think there's net loss of 300,000 rental properties.
Yeah, it was about that.
But for the right landlords, doing it all properly. What I would say though for landlords, before we slip onto the tenant bit, I said it in the last video, if you are not a full-time landlord, as in if that's not your full-time job, if you've got 1, 2, 3 properties, that wouldn't work. You wouldn't be earning enough money out of it to not have to work. You have to get a managing agent. That's what I'm going to say. Not you should, you really have to. Little example, we, as part of our service, some landlords want us just to find them a tenant, reference them, move them in with the tenancy agreement and do nothing else. Not collect any rent, not manage it. But as part of our service, when we know something's expiring, we'll let them know. Just heads up, Mr. Smith, as I mentioned before, compliance is hugely important. Just heads up, your gas cert's expiring or your EICR's expiring or your EPC's expiring. We contacted a let-only landlord who just asked us to let it for them and find them a tenant. We emailed them saying, just a heads up, your EPC expires next month. They were like, no, it doesn't. I had it done when the tenants moved in. And we're like, no, I promise you, it expires next month. You need to get a new one to keep compliant. And they were like, I thought it was only a one-time thing that it needs to get done. And this is where I think ignorance, lovely landlord, but they just don't know, could get you in real big trouble. So let's say the tenant fell on hard times, stopped paying the rent, went through the court eviction process. What the court want to see is all your compliance documents. And if you've got an expired EPC, you ain't going to be able to get them out very easily. And worse than that, do you know we spoke about the rent repayment orders? That the landlord, the court would probably say, I think in that situation, fine, we will order the eviction, but the last 6 months, the property hasn't been compliant, so you're not allowed to chase for the 6 months worth of rent arrears that you're trying to chase for. So ignorance, if you're not doing it full time, as in like, to be a full-time landlord, you need to be reading every single day updates on the latest legislations. You've got to look at court cases and, just be well versed in renting property. If you've got a full-time job and you've got a family, you're probably not going to get the time. So just have it managed.
And that's what you
cover yourself.
I was sort of quite ignorant to this. You were telling me about how many landlords, this is like a side hustle. I think people's assumption is landlords just kind of sit back. They've got all this money, they've got all these houses.
It's about 80%.
They just kind of swan around. It's not true, is it? It's side hustle, like investment, rolling a dice in something, I'm going to go for it, I'm going to be a landlord.
Yeah, and most landlords expect, it's just a retirement plan. It really is. They bought it 10, 15 years ago, hope it wipes its face for the next 10, 15 years, and they'll sell it with hopefully no mortgage in 20 years' time, and they'll retire on the money. It really is down to that. But ignorance isn't a defence in court. And I had another landlord situation, which I think is worth it. And we recently moved a tenant in. The landlord wanted us to let the property and collect the rent for him. 3 weeks after he moved in, he emailed saying, because we don't manage it right now, so any problems with the property, tenant calls landlord. He emailed us saying, just a heads up in case the tenant contacts you, they emailed me to tell me that the extractor hood on the oven has stopped working. And I replied to say, well, it was working before you moved in, so you need to get it fixed. And I said to him, you are really at risk. Like, that is breach of tenancy, right? And I think there's probably a lot of landlords that take that approach, and it's really dangerous approach. What you should be doing was say, we had a proper inventory done, is saying, no worries, I'll order for a contractor to come out and inspect it, and if in the contractor's opinion it's been damaged, you have to pay the bill. But it's always the landlord's obligation until proven otherwise. Back to the washing machine thing I said about if you find a £1 coin in it, then fine, tenant, you've got to pay the bill, really sorry. But the landlord has an obligation to maintain the fabric of the building and what was in it when you took over the tenancy, which is why I said it's easier and simpler and better to just rent property unfurnished, because every piece of that furniture is your obligation.
Yeah.
And you might have a tenant sit down on the sofa and rip it. They've kind of jumped on it and ripped it, but unless you can prove they've jumped on it and they've not just sat on it, you've got to pay for it.
Yeah.
So it's with landlord and tenant law, it's very much landlord is guilty until proven innocent. And maybe it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just how it is. So just cover your backside, make sure you're fully compliant. And if you only got 1, 2, 3, 4 properties and it's not your full-time job, have a good managing agent keep you compliant.
Yeah, feels sensible, particularly with this bill. This bill really emphasises a lot of that responsibility element.
Yeah.
Can't let it slip. Should we think about tenants?
Yeah, great idea.
Last time on landlords. So
what I wanted to rewind on actually quickly, sorry,
Sure.
Paul, to quickly interrupt. I had this guy comment on here's the comment, I won't call his name out because, and he said, how are rents going to rise when there are protections built in to stop rents rising above market price? So that's a really good comment, but I think there's a misconception here that rents will rise because market price could well rise 20% because of the lack of properties and landlords. So the protections aren't in place to stop landlords being able to achieve market price, which could be a huge amount higher than what they're currently paying in 12 months. What the protections there is to stop landlords asking, if the market's gone up 10%, asking for 20%. But the point that where the misconception is put here, an independent board to determine if the rent rises are in line with market values and that these will be subject to review. They'll only be subject to review once they go to review. Many tenants will probably just say, okay, thank you, yeah, I'll pay that rent. So it's important that even now, tenants have the option to challenge unfair rent increases. And we've got to try and decipher landlords asked rent versus market rise, because they are going to rise, just maybe at a slower pace after this whole renters' rights bill, maybe. So it's a really interesting in time. Another thing here, actually, good for a tenant. What about rats? Landlord advised, I've done all the appropriate legwork to resolve the issue. Should this have been his responsibility? Rats in a property.
No one wants to think about rats in a property.
No one wants to think about rats.
Nightmare.
But if he has done what he can, that's all he can do. So then you have to get on to the council, is a good bit of advice. And fundamentally, rats generally are there for a reason. Whether it's, if the property's secure and there's no holes in the walls and for rats to get in and out, it's generally bins outside. Are they coming in because the bins of the neighbours are all overflowing? And you can't just say, the place I live has rats, it has to be my landlord's problem. If the landlord sent a contractor out or a pest controller to kind of help with the situation, but he's done all he can, that's all he can do.
Then it becomes like a local authority thing.
Local authority, environmental health, yeah. And this is where there needs to be clear demarcation between, that tenant might be thinking my landlord's terrible because I've got rats. They don't really think my landlord's good because I've told them I've got rats. He sent somebody out, they've done their best, and I've still got rats. that it's your house, you're living there. Are you leaving the bag of rubbish outside your back door every night? It's so many variables. It's just not the landlord's problem.
Yeah. Everyone needs to know those processes, don't they? I think it's another reason why I'd support your call for landlords to use managing agents, because I just feel like having someone you can ring straight away who can talk to you on the phone and knows, like for me, when I was renting, I had landlords that were an absolute pain in the ass.
Yeah.
They'd be working during the day or they'd be out doing something on holiday and you'd just be leaving voicemails or emailing them. It'd stress you out.
Yeah.
It's nice to just be able to ring someone who answers and you go, right, can you help me out? I've got a problem. What's your advice?
And remember what I said in the last video, from a managing agent perspective, the longer you stay in that property, paying your rent happily, the better it is for them. So they don't want to rock the boat. You want to move out because we've got to then remarket it and it's all over again. Whereas if you're in there for 5 years straight, that's more profitable for us because we're just helping you live there happily, paying the right rent, whatever that might be, depending on the market and the landlord's expectations.
Any more comments you want to pick up on?
There we go. Someone's put here. So this is on the comment, why UK landlords are fleeing, the hidden truth behind rising rents. These are all on the channel if you wanted to go and watch them. But someone's put, so explain the huge amount of building going on. Sensationalist drive. There is a huge amount of building going on, but it's nowhere near putting a dent in the amount of properties we need to be built. So that's the problem with the supply and demand issue. Loads of opinions. All that will happen is tenants will have things harder, rents will rise, but I'm so careful now. This is the landlord. He gets 35 people for every house and 25 go straight in the bin, is what he said. Losing Section 21 is a big problem. So it's also regionalised. You know, some markets are different to others. We're obviously in the southeast and London in the southeast. But yeah, let's switch gears into whatever happens with this renters' rights bill that's going to come in end of this year, how we and me and Power Bespoke can equally help tenants, because that's important.
Yeah, definitely. What's your kind of general take on how the bill and the future looks then for a tenant in terms of their rights? Has there anything changed there that should really have an eye on, or any advice that you have around the rights that a tenant possesses?
I don't really think it's changing their rights much, because they can still be evicted. The unfair evictions are going to be harder for landlords to do, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean that feels good
for sure.
That's no unfair eviction.
But Section 8, rent arrears, breach of tenancy, I don't feel like they're overly. If anything, it's like we touched on this before. The goal of the bill is to give tenants more rights, renters' rights bill, and by abolishing fixed-term tenancies, you're just giving them less rights. They want to give tenants more security in properties, but by abolishing the ability, like one of my landlords might want to give a tenant a 3-year tenancy. There we go. Pay your rent on time every month and you're here for 3 years. That's going to be gone. It'd be a rolling periodic tenancy. But the landlord can give what they're suggesting. I think the notice period for the landlord would be 3 months notice and a tenant 2 months. And they're trying to level that out to be 2 months either side or whatever. But there's no real security there.
Kind of less rights.
Less security. That's for sure. Yeah.
What about, one thing we talked previously with the landlord was around responsibilities for like upkeep and maintenance, and you kind of mentioned it there. Any significant changes on that end for a tenant that they should be aware of? Or?
Well, they're trying to bring in a decent home standard, which is fair enough. But, you know, outside of all these government changes and law changes, I think it's important for tenants to understand that a landlord has no obligation to improve the property whilst you're living there. They have a massive contractual obligation to maintain the property while you're living there. So I might have touched on this in the last video, but we had a really lovely situation. Landlord's lovely, tenant's lovely, rents are rising in the area, so it was tenancy renewal date and we had a discussion. We could have got $1,500 a month. They were paying $1,400 a month and we agreed on $1,450, right? Tenant said, totally happy with that. Thank you. I'll agree to that. Oh, and by the way, would the landlord be happy to install a dishwasher, do you think? So it wasn't, I will pay the $1,450 if they will improve the property and put a dishwasher in. It was always, yeah, totally get it. We love the living here. And the landlord was like, absolutely. She was actually embarrassed that she hadn't put one in because she thought she had done it a year or so ago. And just really nice. But from a landlord's obligations, and this is the problem, I think tenants, where this will help, okay, renters' rights bill, it's really good. Where this will help is there's a thing called a revenge eviction, a bit of a term that landlords have termed it, or agents might have termed it. I don't know where it come from, but it's a revenge eviction where like tenants might have been a bit of a pain in the backside for the last 6 months and they just want to get them out. Where this will be good is that can no longer be done. A landlord has to And I think that's caused fear in tenants that I don't want to be too pushing my landlord for this and that. When actually, if the landlord's not keeping up to their end of the bargain with the tenancy and the landlord's in breach of tenancy, you should absolutely be not paying your rent until it's done. I really believe that. There's a tenancy is an agreement, both parties. If you've reported a problem with the maintenance, not an improvement. If it's like you're not prepared to install a dishwasher, I'm not paying my rent, because you won't get anywhere with that. If it's extreme, the boiler's broken, I've got no heating. If a landlord's been seen to sit on that for too long, then you're in your right to say, look, fair enough, but I think I deserve a pro-rata refund on my rent for 3 days, because it's taken you 7 days to get this fixed, and it really isn't fair. And that's where I think these new protections will benefit tenants, and I hope that they will get a bit stronger with these not nice landlords. Most landlords will make it their absolute priority, whether it's 2 a.m. or 4 p.m, to get a plumber out to try and repair it or replace it as soon as possible. But some landlords will push the boundaries a bit, I think, is what they can and can't do. The
bit that I can recall some concerns around last time we chatted about this was something that I think a lot of people will hear, particularly tenants, and go, oh, that's great, I'm really happy with that. But then how you broke it down and explained it certainly sounded concerning, and that was the rent increases. So this idea that under the Renters' Right Bill, landlords will have restrictions on how frequently they can increase the rent. Was it once a year?
Once a year.
Yeah. Which, on the surface, oh, great, cool, so my rent can only go up once, rather than multiple times a year. What you talked about last time was that, well, don't get too excited about that, because it could mean that people that's your one chance to crank the price. So that actually, on the surface, sounds good for a tenant, but in practice might actually be quite concerning.
Yeah, and on the surface, if rents have gone up 20% in that year, then your rent's probably going to go up 20% in a year, because there's no restriction to not increase it less or more than market rate. Market rate is determined by supply and demand. I need to get that out there, right? Unless we magic a load of properties out of places, prices will keep going up, because demand's going up, supply isn't keeping up, so rents are going to continue to rise. Restricting landlords to only be able to increase it once a year is actually, maybe a tenant in a crazily rising market would prefer a 10% increase every 6 months to manage the hike better. Because then they're going to start, this is where we call the this and them mentality, is, oh my God, my landlord's just increased my rent 20%. They don't say because the market has risen 20% because of X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
So it's that, it is what it is. But I kind of feel like there should be an agreement between landlord and tenant to be able to come to that decision themselves. Is
it going to create a bit of a tension point, a bit of a flashpoint in a rent agreement? Because
I think it would,
It's quite a scheduled thing, isn't it? Because the landlord's going to be looking, going, I kind of need to get this done now. I've only got a few months left. We need to. It's kind of crunch time. Yeah,
and it's going to cause friction every year, I guess. And my advice is, and you can watch the video back before, but I think landlords should absolutely increase rents if market rents are increasing, not to the extreme. If you've got a good tenant, don't take them to the extreme of what the market value is a year, 3 years into a tenancy. Don't wring the flannel and squeeze every last penny. Like I said before, we had a property that was getting 1,400. It could achieve 15. We agreed on 1,450 because we're in a great tenant and we want them to be happy and want them to stay. But there will be landlords that will see it as their only opportunity. If the market's risen 10%, let's get it up 10% then.
But there are going to be caps on what that could go to. But those caps will be a reflection of the value of the property. And in some cases, well, in most cases with property rising, you can't really do a great deal about that.
No.
It just is what it is.
Yeah. And this is why it was kind of coined in the media as a different way to cap rents. Like, it's not capping rents.
It's something that all is it. It's just you've got one shot at the rent up.
Rents will rise. And the flip side, I also hope there's a day where so many properties are built that rents start to go down, because then it's the other way around. Every year it could be going the other way. But I see that extremely unlikely, unfortunately, for tenants, unless there's, what's the goal, like 400,000 properties a year need to be built or something like that, just to make up for the backlog that hasn't been built per target for the last 10 years. Like, we've been hitting our target for the last 10 years, Conservative government, whatever. So now Labour's going to try and do that with the grey belt and the green belt and this belt and that belt. And it's just like, I hope more property is great for me.
It feels good for, well, I guess it's bad for, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people for a long time in this country have talked about the housing stock and how low it is and how it's creating problems all over the place. So
I don't ever want to quote, but when you compare net immigration versus properties built, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And, you know, from my perspective, I would rather have 2 properties to rent out at £1,000 a month each, rather than 1 property at £2,000 a month.
Yeah.
Like, we have no real... We people, you know, in the comments all day long is bash the letting agent and bash the agent, and I get it, I understand it, because we're the conduit, we're the in-betweenie. But £100 a year rent increases doesn't really affect my life at all. I would rather there be 300,000 more properties a year to be able to sell and rent and manage.
Yeah, fair. One thing that the bill did target and talked about, use the term slum landlords, which is kind of a bit of a... I mean, I don't really know what that means. It's kind of media. It's a bit of a throwaway term. Is it like a slum landlord? Like, what even is that? But generally used to describe landlords who are not doing a good job in any way, shape or form of providing a tenant with a safe, livable property. Under the Renters' Rights Bill, what obligations exist there? Are there any kind of changes should someone be living in a property and they be extremely dissatisfied with the living conditions, the experience they're having?
Yeah, so there's going to be a decent home standard, but I want to touch on something in a minute. Plus there's going to be the increase in the EPC rating for an energy efficiency to a C. I think it's a B, C, D, E right now. Anything under an E you can't rent out, but the C, they're going to bring that up at some point. I think the bigger problem with slum landlords, if we want to coin that phrase for a minute, is it's not like letting people live in crap. It's generally overcrowding of properties as well. And there's been laws for years preventing overcrowding of properties. You know, like you can have 2 people living in a 1-bedroom flat, because the law classes a room as a room. So that's a 1-bedroom property. It's classed as 2 rooms, because you could use the lounge as a bedroom. So even the government accept that, right? You don't have to have that room to sit and watch telly. You could lay on your bed and watch telly, and it could be a bedroom as well. But there's things like that's only applicable. So say a mother and a son were renting a 1-bedroom place. They can only have a 1-bedroom place until they can only be in the same room until they get to 11 years old. And then they've got their separate rooms. So I think the biggest problem with slum landlords is always how people have rented this understairs cupboard out as a bedroom, and that's overcrowding. It's illegal. But that's been around forever. So that's not really going to stop. Change, I don't think that's going to stop with the bill. Decent home standard, I do think so. But that ties in, I think, with the energy performance rating, because you can't really have a slum of a house with an EPC rating of C, because your boiler's going to be good, your windows are going to be good, your insulation is going to be good. Yes, your kitchen might need replacing because it could be 15 years old, but that's not going to be a term. They're not going to say once your kitchen becomes 15 years old, you've got to replace it. If it's functional and it works, it's marketable, and someone will rent it. And I'd rather rent that at a lower rent than a whole refurbished one at a higher rent. Yeah. More so now the rents are going up.
What about evictions? That's definitely something where tenants are in a better position, without a doubt, under the Renters' Rights Bill than they were previously, right?
Yes. The no-fault eviction is going to be abolished. So there has to be a reason. Yeah. That reason has to generally be breach of tenancy, and that breach of tenancy could be based on rent, it could be based on antisocial behaviour, and if they do evict you, then they have to sell the property or move back into it themselves.
And if you stop paying your rent, you have 3 months before your landlord can take action, legal action.
That's what they've been talking about. Yeah. But in the House of Lords, they're talking about trying to change it to 2 months.
Okay. So that's that. I guess that falls into that same category, doesn't it, of evictions? Because like that will be...
Yeah.
So if you were to summarise your sort of main advice and takeaways for tenants under this bill, what would it be?
It would be, when looking to rent a property, as much as people love to hate estate agents and letting agents, go with a property that's managed by a managing agent. And a lot of tenants think, I want to rent privately from landlords because I get a better rent. And it may be true, actually, because if they haven't got to pay us £200 a month to manage it, they might be able to accept £200 a month less for the rent. But with the way that the safety law legislation, problems being fixed and solved, the landlord's safer with an agent, tenant's safer with an agent. Just choose which agencies you actually look through, though, because not all agencies are the same. So just do your research, and an agent involved will protect both parties. There's laws in place, and a managing agent has to operate within those laws themselves, let alone the agent. They have to make sure the agent is operating. Otherwise, the letting agent can be taken to court by the landlord saying, you didn't do this for me, and that's part of our agreement. So, yeah.
I like that. Good advice there for tenants, and we've good advice again for landlords. Kind of touch both bases there. What do you want from the comments, Perry? Do you want people to drop some questions?
Yes.
That you can pick up in a future show?
Loads of questions. Comment below. Subscribe to the channel. We're always putting these stuff out, and we share lots of sales advice, landlord advice, tenant advice. We just want to give great impartial advice to the world of the internet. And we use the comments as inspiration for answering the comments live on the videos, but also for topics for whole new videos.
Great stuff. Thanks for watching, folks. Cheers, Perry. Good chat. See you next time.